Hello, here we'll talk about weather conditions and flight types. First, we'll introduce the topic VFR, that stands for Visual Flight Rules. We say that a flight is a VFR flight when it is flying in accordance to these flight rules. And these are basically a set of regulations that let the aircraft navigate and have position awareness based only on what he can see. So basically a flight being performed under VFR means that he needs no other aid than a pilot's eyes to be able to locate where the aircraft is. This doesn't mean that VFR flights do not have instruments. Of course they have. They have altimeters and they have anemometers and variometers and other things that we'll see in other lessons, but they do not need any kind of a ground nav aid, or they don't need VORs, they don't need ILS, they don't need GPS, they just rely on visual observation, and it is through this method that pilots know where they are, basically following a chart or a map and trying to identify the object below, such as rivers or churches or squares in different towns, and thus being able to retrieve their position. It's not an easy method, it's quite difficult and people get lost actually, but it's visual flight rules. There are certain phases of the flight that, as we'll see, can be performed under visual flight rules even though the aircraft might be more advanced equipped. Good. On the other hand, we have IFR, that stands for Instrument Flight Rules, and here we allocate those flights, basically like 99% of commercial flights, of course, that fly in accordance to their instruments and that determine their position using radio signals retrieved from different navaids. These can be ground or space-based navaids, as we'll see. VORs, ILSs, NDBs, GPS, and perform all kinds of navigations. For a flight to perform an IFR flight, we need the aircraft to be equipped with certain instruments. We need the ground infrastructure to be there, to have ground navaids or space-based navaids, something definitely outside the aircraft, and we do also need the crew to be trained and certified to use this kind of equipment. Good. So in between VFR and IFR, we find what we call Zulu and Yankee flight plans. Zulu flight plans are those that depart using VFR rules, and in the middle of the flight they change to IFR and end up landing IFR. This can be the case, for instance, for small aerodromes such as Fuente Milanos next to Segovia, where we could depart only using VFR rules because there is no sort of a ground navigate infrastructure. And if we were to travel to another more complex airport where we would like to use some sort of navigate, we could change to IFR in the middle of the flight. On the other hand, a Yankee flight plan is a flight plan in which we change from IFR to VFR, the other way around. So it would be the case of departing from, let's say, Paris-Le Bourget using IFR rules and ending up in Fuente Milanos with a visual approach. These things we've talked about relate only to the rules or the regulations that follow the navigation of a flight. On the other hand, we're going to talk about weather conditions. And first, I'd like to introduce the VMC concept. That stands for Visual Meteorological Conditions. Visual meteorological conditions are a set of minimum required meteorological conditions that, as we'll see, are required for VFR flights. And these visual meteorological conditions change depending on the altitude, change depending on the regulator, on the country, on the airspace class, change depending even on the type of aircraft. For example, helicopters have VMC defined differently from aircraft because they fly slower and thus maybe they can operate visually with less visibility. So, well, it's quite a complex topic. This comes regulated by the Single European Rules of the Air in certain articles I'm not going to talk about because it's sort of deep. But let's just stick with the fact that we can define VMC conditions in an airdrome environment. And since in the last lesson we saw how we define weather in an airdrome environment and we do it using the METAR, we are going to establish here that conditions are VMC when visibility is equal or more than 5,000 meters, and also we have no clouds or no significant clouds, let's say, below 1,500 feet. And this means, or this gathers only broken and overcast clouds. So we can have few and scattered clouds below 1,500 feet, but we cannot have broken or overcast conditions under 1,500 feet. If we find broken or overcast conditions at or above 1,500 feet above the airdrome, then we are at VMC conditions. And on the other hand, we have the opposite. We have IMC conditions, that stand for instrument meteorological conditions, which apply basically when VMC conditions do not apply. So when visibility in an airdrome is less than 5,000 meters, or there is broken or overcast below 1,500 feet, then we would say that we are under IMC conditions. And obviously there is a relationship between the terms above that I've briefly introduced before. We will only be able to fly VFR when we are in VMC. That is, VFR traffic cannot enter IMC areas. On the other hand, IFR traffic can operate in any condition because IFR are equipped with navigation equipment that let them enter IMC areas, and obviously if they can properly manage in the hot circumstances such as IMC, they can also do very well under VMC. Another concept I'd like to introduce here is the LVC concept, that stands for low visibility conditions. Low visibility conditions are a degradation of IMC conditions, particularly at an airdrome level. And when they happen and they are defined locally, there is no standard definition for LVCs, then LVPs or low visibility procedures apply. And they are typically enforced by airport authorities and the tower of control. And here on this page we can see an example of different restrictions that are defined in the AIP of Barcelona, establishing not only the conditions below which low visibility procedures are applied, but also what those procedures are. Let's say traffic restrictions, let's say limiting the amount of cars or other vehicles in the maneuvering area, just restraining them within the apron, or even using stop bars to prevent runway incursions.